And we are a storytelling species. That's who we are from our tribal past. We respond to stories. And I'm going to tell you a story about the cultural narratives underpinning our society, what the myths are, and what, in my 15 years of working on this stuff, what the realities are. And then I'm going to end with not an exhaustive list, but maybe a list of 15 or 20 things to do as an economy, as a culture, as a community, and as individuals, and maybe as part of your organization as humanists. So I'm going to go relatively fast, and I'm going to tell about the 10 big modern myths, but in reality, I couldn't fit them into 10, so there's going to be 20. So I will go through that, and let's just wait for questions till the end. So myth number 1 is that money and technology fully describe our wealth and productivity. In economics, they talk about labor and capital, and everything is fit into labor and capital. Well, let's think about energy, about fossil carbon. So this is me. I do the work of about 1/8 of a horse. This is my horse, Binga, who does the work of 1 horse. This is my little Rhino, Yamaha Rhino, which does the work of 45 horses. And this is my truck with a little bit of diesel fuel. It does the work of 300 horses for pennies. And if you take a flight across the nation, that plane will do the work of 100,000 horses because of this energy-dense fuel that we've pulled out over hundreds of millions of years of its creation. We only pay for the cost of extraction, not the cost of its development. So $1,000 of energy in our economy, according to economists, according to business schools, is worth $1,000 worth of cupcakes or bicycle helmets or iPods or whatever, except it can do orders of magnitude more work than those things. 1 barrel of oil, which costs $55 right now in the open market, does 4.5 years of my physical work, okay? So we use 110 billion barrels of oil equivalent of coal, oil, and natural gas per year as humans, global human society. 110 billion times 4.5 is we are getting the labor equivalent of 500 billion human workers for pennies, relative to the 4 billion real human workers we have. We take it for granted like a fish swims in water. We don't even see the energy ubiquity in our worlds, in our lifestyles. So our culture is energy blind. We conflate the dollar value of energy that we pay at the pump, we pay to Xcel Energy, with the work value, which is orders of magnitude greater. And we don't include the cost of pollution at all, except for at the local micro scale. So the reality is that money and technology, the cultural myth that is what underpins our wealth, they are both dependent variables on low-cost carbon energy. Okay, another myth, money is real. Well, if you take this conceptual diagram of the last 500 years or so, we spread around the planet and access the sustainable flows of nature. The sun, the hydrologic cycles with soil and water and animal labor and human labor, and we kind of tapped out at what the sustainable flows of nature could provide. And then, a couple hundred years ago, we found what was effectively indistinguishable from magic, the fossil carbon under the soil, which was a depletable resource. And we started up, most non-renewable resources follow a Gaussian or a bell-shaped curve. We find the best first, and then we increase our scale, and then there's a maximum, and then we have the lower quality stuff left. So we started following this curve. And then what we did is we created money out of thin air, effectively, to represent these underlying capital. So early economists, Adam Smith and such, they did recognize the importance of resource productivity. They did include land and land productivity in their models. But we started shooting up so fast in our economic production the last 150 years that land no longer described our wealth. So over time, economists and business schools, they kicked out resources as a driver of our wealth and productivity, and it just became labor and capital. So now we're using credit massively around the world, which is just creating digits in the bank to allow us to consume more now. We're doing this in massive amounts, using this black line to extend our consumption. Our society now views the world solely through a financial lens, and we've financialized the human experience. So money is real, but it's mostly a marker for energy, resources, and real capital. Okay, another myth, drilling holes is sustainable. These two graphs are identical. This shows one story that we hear in the news. Technology can overcome any resource problem, and it did. This is US oil production from the 1950s. 1970, we peaked and declined. And now with shale oil, the Bakken Shale and the Permian and all these other basins, we've pierced the 1970 peak. We're the largest oil producer in the world. But of course, we're not producing oil, we're extracting oil. And this stuff is very expensive. This graph, identical graph as this. It shows that the conventional lower 48 states peaked in 1970 and has been in decline. Then we added Alaska, non-contiguous state, but part of the United States 50. Then we added offshore Gulf of Mexico oil, and now we're adding tight oil, which is the source rock. There's nothing left after that. And this is very expensive. It costs more than oil is selling for right now. It costs $55 to $60 a barrel for the shale companies to make money. So we go after the best first. What's left after shale oil? Nothing. Nothing of high quality in any case. Now there's a lot of shale oil, but it depletes very, very rapidly, and it's costly. So how have we done this? One way is we have cheap access to debt. This is a conceptual oil field that this blue line is today. And then all of a sudden this blue line is today. When we add debt, we can find a little bit newer oil that we didn't have before, and we can extract what exists faster. We can raise our production, but only temporarily, and then there's a steeper decline. So what we're doing is we're building a bigger straw in the Bakken and some of these places. We're building a bigger straw, and we're not hearing a sucking sound yet. We're getting a lot of oil out, but the amount left is far less than the price would indicate. So this is a graph from The Optimist, the International Energy Agency, a few months ago. And they said if we, for whatever reason, stopped drilling for oil today, now we're not going to do that, but if we did, the 90 million barrels of oil today would be down to 10 million barrels a day by 2040. So this is because of the ongoing depletion of existing reservoirs and fields. Now we are going to finance and drill more oil, but what's left is the more costly stuff. So this is important. So energy as a cost of our economies troughed, hit a 7-century low in 1999. So if you look at the percentage of an economy that was energy, it used to be almost 100% because it was you and your oxen were doing work all year round to get food for your family. And then it started to go down to 50%, and then with the dawn of the industrialization, it had a sharp decline all the way down to around 5%. And right now we're at around 8% of our economies are directed towards energy. The other 92% is Disneyland and NASCAR and Unitarian Universalist churches and schools and airports and all those things. But we're headed towards energy being a larger and larger percentage of our economy. So the reality is we're drawing down the principal and calling it interest. Myth, technology will, yes?
When we say energy, you don't mean like human energy.
No, I mean fossil energy, yeah. Technology will solve everything somehow. This is a common thing that we hear. Well, given this energy lens, there are two general types of technology. Type 1 is it finds ways to use energy more efficiently, like in a power plant, or finds new energy sources like solar or geothermal or something like that. Type 2 technology is increases demand for energy via doing tasks humans used to do manually, like a chainsaw replaced a handsaw, or a car replaced a horse or walking. Also, type 2 is gadgets that we didn't have that are big energy demands, draws. So our laptops, our cell phones, et cetera, if you add that all up, right now, including the server farms and all the creation, it's around 18% of our electricity is in the cloud. So these are physical things that increase our demand for energy. So most technology is just a way that humans need more energy in the future because of the gadgets and things that they've gotten. So the reality is technology is in most cases just building a higher demand for energy in the following period. Okay, another myth, growth is forever. In the economics departments around the world, there are no discussions about limits to growth, because we will find a way. If things get too expensive, there will be a market solution for these things. So I teach my students the rule of 70, which is if you take a percentage growth rate and you divide it into 70, that's how many years it'll take to double. So if something's growing at 1% a year, it takes 70 years to double. If something's growing at 5% a year, it'll take 14 years to double. Right now, all the economic, government, NGO, large institutions in the world expect that the global economy will grow 2.5% to 3% every year this century, which means my 19-year-old students will see not only one doubling, but two doublings in their lifetimes. By the time they're 70, the world economy and our resource and energy throughput with it are going to be 4 times the size that it is today. Is that possible? Is that desirable? What would happen if we did that? What would happen if we don't do that? So these are the issues. On a finite planet, we're expecting continued economic growth. Consistent economic growth has been a very temporary, very amazing, and very recent human phenomenon. This is growth over the last 2,000 years, and there were many, many periods where there was flat or stagnation for centuries. But the 19th and 20th and so far 21st century have been a very unique period, unparalleled in human history, and it's based on fossil carbon. Myth, green growth will solve these problems. So under current cultural guidelines, we can only add energy, not subtract. So this chart shows for the last 20 years, the gray bars are how much we built fossil capacity every year, and the green bars are increasing rapidly, but they're still, that's the renewables, but they're still smaller than the gray bars. The only year that we actually reduced our emissions globally was 2009, when we had a recession, a bad recession. So renewables are currently merely making fossil carbon more efficient. We're building a larger heat engine with a larger portion of renewables. So if we go back to this graph, most of the conversations in the world on renewables are extending the non-renewable line into the future to a higher level. And the reality is we can build a great society using mostly renewables. It's not going to look anything like the society we have today, and it's going to, by definition, be smaller. But this, we don't know what level it's at, but we're not even researching that. Everything is researching a bigger economy using renewables. So the reality is green growth is still growth, not green and not sustainable, at least not the way we're pursuing it now. Myth, debt doesn't matter. In business schools, they teach us that debt is an intertemporal transfer of consumption preferences. Some rich guy gives a poor person a loan, and over time he gets paid back, and then in 20 years he gets his principal back because the poorer person needs to consume today. So debt does two things in our global economy. One is it funnels capital to the rich. And two is we create money from thin air. So all of our money that's created is in reference to a finite amount of energy and resources. So in that sense, it really is a Ponzi scheme. So the reality is debt pulls consumption forward and there are limits. The world as a whole today has over 300% debt relative to the size of our economy. Since I've been alive, we have grown our economy smaller than we've grown our debt every single year. And this is unsustainable. The only reason it seems sustainable is it's the governments, our big daddy warbucks are the governments. If you as individuals had 325% debt to GDP in your own household, there would be problems. The bank would be calling you at some point. So, in my opinion, a highly likely scenario in the coming decade is what I refer to as a great simplification, is a reduction in GDP of advanced economies is now very likely when we remove low productivity debt with a shift towards lower productivity energy and resources and a return to current solar inputs. I think this setback is going to be 30%. It would have been that in 2008, but we used the bazookas of the central banks to paper over all kinds of guarantees, artificial low interest rates, too big to fail, quantitative easing. All these temporary measures we started in 2009 are still with us in 2019. So we've financialized the whole global system, and we have to keep it going to guarantee things. So the reality is debt pulls consumption forward, and there are limits. Myth, the American dream is based on hard work. Well, given what I've just told you, the American dream is not a birthright, but it's mostly based on fossils and a brand new virgin country. The United States in the last 20 years, in the last 50 years, in the last 100 years, in the last 200 years, since the dawn of time, has used more fossil armies than any other country in the world. So this describes a lot of our productivity because we have the world's leading reserve currency and the world's, at the time, largest access to coal, oil, and natural gas. Myth, what's happening is someone's fault. We are in-group, out-group biased. We have a huge social aspect to who we are, and we like to protect and admire our tribe, and then the other tribe is it's their fault or we ostracize them. The truth of what's happening, though, is what's happening is biophysical and ecological, and our fossil armies are asking for pay raises. And so there are limits, and we're hitting social limits to growth first. Witness the 40% of Americans that have less than $500 to their name, and we're eventually, soon in my opinion, going to hit actual limits to growth. Climate change is the problem. We hear a lot about climate change. Climate change, from a many-century perspective, is absolutely the problem. But climate change is just a symptom of the underlying problem, which is overshoot of our carrying capacity based on non-renewable resources. If you look at the last, this is a chart, the black line shows human population and the red line shows per capita GDP. Americans today have 48 times the GDP that the average human did in the year 1800. Okay, so the human economy has increased by a factor of 100 in the last 200 years. So climate change is one of the many, many symptoms of this larger story. Overpopulation is a problem as a myth. Yes, we have 7.7 billion humans. That is too many for the long term. But do we have a population problem? So every year we have 80 million net births of human babies, which are 8 pounds plus or minus. We also have 100 million net births of cars, which are 3,000 pounds plus or minus. So which is the larger problem? Is it an American baby expecting to consume like we have, or a Filipino baby or 5 babies that use 5% of what we use? So world population growth rate peaked 50 years ago and has been in decline. But this gets back to the emergent economic phenomenon of GDP. Is population the primary problem, or is the fact that we're culturally pursuing GDP? Because right now in countries that have low population growth, the government frantically are asking people to go have sexy vacations and have sex so they have more babies, because they need consumers to buy diapers and toys and pay for schools and pension funds and everything. So is it population that's driving the problem, or is it our unbelievable, unstoppable urge to grow GDP? I would argue that population is a product of our energy surplus and economic organization. Our predicament is a combination of both population and consumption. Myth, money and stuff are what make us happy. Well, what do? We seek money for basic needs. Maybe that's 1/10 of the total. We seek money to stockpile novelty and comfort so I can enter a fantasy football contest next week or have a trip to New York City next month or whatever. And also we seek money for relative status. Mostly we use money as a modern marker of status, and our culture still advocates that. So this was me the day I got my master's in finance and was about to go work on Wall Street and made a lot of money. And then I spent it all doing lavish parties and traveling and stuff. And this is me, a PhD in ecological economics, and my dad called me environmental wacko, kind of with, you know, like a little chagrin, like he was apologizing for me. So I get paid in things other than dollars. I get paid in community and in knowledge and in teaching and in sharing. I don't make much money anymore, but I make plenty to have a great life and to do things of meaning. So money is just a proximate goal. The ultimate goal is status, meaning, an enjoyable life of purpose. By the way, the energy energy and money, if you are very poor and have nothing, you get massive increases in well-being from additional energy. But if you're quite rich, you get very little increases from more energy. Above 100 gigajoules per capita per year, kind of Turkey level or Italy, then you get very little hedonic increase from more energy use. Same thing with income. Guatemala, maybe not the best example now, but versus Kuwait, you can make 10 times as much money in a different country, but if you're in a poor country and everyone else around you is poor and you play soccer and have good times and everyone's kind of working together, that community gives you a huge well-being increase as long as basic needs are met. So our well-being is disconnected at top levels from our resource consumption. And the reality is, after basic needs are met, the best things in life are free. Here's me reading a story to my coonhound at night, which she likes sometimes. Myth. Fairness and equality should be our top priority. This is a very common theme we hear today. So think this triangle here is Americans, 2019. Well, there's 5%, the top 5%. We want to be like them. They have a lot of money. We need to have a wealth transfer to give us some of their money. Okay, there's some valid points there. The wealth inequality is one of the biggest social cohesion risks in our country, but we have to potentially use different boundaries. What about the 7.6 billion humans alive today? What about Americans relative to them? We use 4.5 times the energy as the average human and have a lot of energy privilege in this country relative to other countries. What about all the humans alive today versus humans in the past, and especially our descendants, humans in the future, who are not going to have all this access to fossil carbon and hydrocarbons to support their lifestyles? What about contingent human lives? We've had 100 billion humans ever live. So with 8 billion today, there's about a 1 in 12 chance that if you're human, you're alive today. And most species last 1 million years. So we could potentially have 1 trillion human childhoods yet to be born. We're not thinking about them with our consumption and our expectations. And what about our biological cousins? What about the 10 million species other than humans that we're taking 35% of the net primary productivity and directing it all to human activities, plus the additional productivity from fossils? So what seems fair may not be, using wider boundaries. We should strive for fairness of opportunity and empathy and kindness. Myth. We have a shortage of resources. You might have implied that based on what I've said so far. So the other slide showed that the average American uses, our bodies are the equivalent of one 100-watt light bulb, all right? We use 100 of those. Every American has 100 100-watt light bulbs worth of energy traveling around us all the time. So if you think about it, though, it's those first few light bulbs of exosomatic energy that's used outside of the body, give us massive benefits. You could use one of those 100 watts to charge a cell phone, or 2 of them to charge a laptop. So in the same way that money gives us declining benefits to more, energy does too. These give us massive increases. By the time we get to the 100th light bulb, we're not getting much psychic benefit from that. So there's a difference. The reality is we don't have a true resource scarcity, but rather we have a longage of expectations. Myth, the experts have the answers. We live in a world where we have islands of expertise separated by oceans of non-science. We have a renewable energy expert, and a climate change expert, and a financial expert, and a psychologist, and endocrine disruptor and toxic experts, and an ecologist. But they rarely fly up high enough to look down at the map of the human predicament. So we are now in an era where we need generalists to construct the map and then get experts involved. We're part of a system, we need generalists. Myth, capitalism is bad, or capitalism is good. Well, capitalism is a product of our biological past. Animals were the first investors. They invest calories to get calories back in their prey. So any ism would have worked during this unique period where we harnessed massive amounts of fossil carbon and hydrocarbons. Capitalism is emergent property of surplus, not good or bad, and I think we can do better in the future. Myth, microeconomics is based on how humans really are. Homo economicus. The economic textbooks teach that we are rational, self-interested utility maximizers. We didn't evolve to see a veridical, a true version of things. We evolved to be adapted to the present moment, whether you saw the truth or not. So we tend to see things that help our own self-image and our own situation. We didn't evolve to care about the truth. We are incredibly other-regarding. This is a picture of people missed a soccer goal, and look at the mirror neurons and the people in empathy with the soccer player. So we are not self-interested. We are partially self-interested, but we're also incredibly social. We care about other people in our community, in our family, in our group. Heaven and GDP is what we should aspire to as a country and species. I've never gotten a laugh to that slide before, but okay, so this is the CO2 in our atmosphere now is at a 3 million year high. This is the last 400,000 years, and we're piercing 415 right now. This is global temperature over the last 400,000 years. This is sea level over the last 400,000 years. We're in a no analog situation. We're living in the carbon pulse, which is this several hundred year window where a species is harvesting ancient productivity from below the ground to support our lifestyles. We are somewhere between this yellow star and the red star. I think we could debate and have hundreds of experts and they could argue, but we're not here and we're not here. So let's be honest. I have some positive things to say at the rest of the presentation, but we are living part of a tragedy. We are destroying the natural world while maintaining our lifestyles. This is, to just be scientifically accurate, we are living in part of a tragedy. Doing what we're doing to nature, and it's no one's fault. This is no one's fault, but we're all complicit. So we're going to need new stories of humans living with each other and humans living on Earth. Myth, we should keep looking for extraterrestrials. I like that. Okay, let's do that. But we're forgetting about intraterrestrials. We're forgetting about the other 10 million species we share the planet with, some of which have evolved self-awareness and consciousness and amazing cultures on their own. There are 300-year-old bowhead whales under the Arctic ice that we know that because we've carbon dated the spear points that we found in some of them. They speak languages that we don't understand, yet we're so hell-bent on putting Teslas in outer space and stuff like that, that we don't even understand the creatures we share this planet with. Myth, we're headed for a Star Trek future. We hear that all the time. The reality is we're living the Star Trek future right now. The things that we in this room are accessing, this is about as Star Trek as it's going to get. So we're headed for an Earth Trek future, for better or worse. The system is too huge, what can one person do? This is the main point of another talk that Audrey watched, which is that humans are self-organizing into this economic system that's functioning like energy-seeking superorganism, like an amoeba that's blind and just going forward every quarter trying to get more energy. So this is a little overwhelming until you understand the implications of it. I think individuals and small groups will change the future because that's what's happened in the past and it will happen again. It's too late, we're doomed, is another myth that we hear. But the future lies in the middle of doom and fantasy. It is natural for humans to hear a story like I'm telling you and either deny it, no, technology will solve a problem, this can't be true. Denial, there's no problem. Or, oh my God, we're so screwed, I didn't know this, I'm just gonna play Overwatch and order pizzas because we're screwed. Well, the truth is that the future is probably in the middle, and we need to work on that because these two poles allow the human brain to resolve dissonance. If we're screwed or there's no problem, then I don't need to do anything. If there is a problem, then I need to do something with my group of humanists in Minnesota, with my family, with my people at my work. Myth, the US Constitution is the correct document for the future. Never shown this slide before. Well, think about all the human social contracts that we've had in the past. The Cave of the Hands, the Code of Hammurabi, Syntagma Square in Greece, the Magna Carta, the US Constitution. We now are part of a planet-eating superorganism. We're approaching a species-level conversation. We live in a full world with no ecological analog, and to say that our future should be guided by a document that was written 240 years ago begs the question. Okay, so those were the myths. Now I'm going to briefly talk about what to do. What to do as a culture. Well, this is my view of the future, that we're going to have an economic depression in the next 10 years. And it's because we've kicked cans repeatedly in the last 50 years. We've papered over our limits with more and more debt, which has made a huge Wile E. Coyote moment in our financial architecture likely. And so I think we're going to decline by 30% or so, and then we're going to self-organize towards some different trajectory. And the organization is going to depend on and probably organize around energy. And how are we going to do that? That's both a physical and a psychological challenge, because right now we are so naive as a culture about the things I'm talking about in this talk that this is overwhelming. Like, what is the story that's going to bring us through here? Not only that, but the physical aspects of it. Keep in mind, as Americans, we use 100 times more energy than our bodies need. Okay? So a 30% drop in this country brings us back to 1994. Wasn't such a disaster. 50% drop brings us to 1973, which was several years after Woodstock. So we face relative scarcity, not absolute scarcity. A lot of it is in our minds and our social expectations. Change the narrative, okay? The narrative right now is our technology is so awesome that we're extracting our lifeblood for our children faster than the other countries. We are draining America first and being proud of it. Okay, so we need to change the narrative. An example of a policy that might happen, help all future scenarios: educate, plan, and implement a tax on all non-renewable resources, not just carbon, but phosphorus and copper and things that deplete. Simultaneously remove taxes on human labor. So if you make 50 grand a year, you get to keep all 50 grand, but things are going to be a lot more expensive. But you could save your money and not spend it on carbon-intensive doodads or whatever. This could not be enacted now, because any tax, any carbon tax or anything like that is going to be the left and the right, mudslinging, and nothing's going to accomplish. In a crisis, it's the best blueprints and plans that are laying around that are going to hopefully be accepted. And I think we need a place for empathy and kindness back in our institutions right now, because our institutions have squeezed out the capacity for these human traits of kindness and reason in many cases, which is just all about parsing everything in the human experience into finance and dollars. So what is the difference between growth and sufficiency? Do we really need to all pursue this when this would be enough? We need to regain civil discourse, trust in science, media, and our neighbors. The challenges from this human superorganism story that I've told you are nonpartisan, okay? No matter who wins this next year for president, Elizabeth Warren, Donald Trump, someone else, everything in this presentation will still remain. These will be the issues we have to solve, and it's not going to be some new president that's going to solve them. We're going to have to do this at the community level, at the individual level. Now, a better president would certainly help this trajectory, but it's not politics. This is us. Can we culturally extend, as opposed to narrow, the circle of our care and empathy? We have to recognize and support the real stock market right now is crashing. We have 2,700 emojis as of 3 months ago that describe something. We have none that describe the future. Not a single one. So I've come up with this T with the arrow pointing forward, and my stepdaughter's going to tattoo that on my ankle. But we need a cultural representation of the future. Earth Trek imagination inventions. The thing I said earlier about Elon Musk, Tesla, this is what we're aspiring to. So I teach a class, I ask my students, what are the 10 best technological inventions ever for humans? Antibiotics, flush toilets, or some of them. I'll just tell you the top 3. The bicycle, the most energy efficient device ever invented by man. Number 2 is the story. We are storytelling individuals, and we can sit for hours and listen to someone talk and there's no energy being used. And the number 1 invention, I'm biased, is the golden retriever, or any dog. Any dog, because we get slow release serotonin and other neurotransmitters from our interaction. So these inventions are technologies in a sort of way, but these are things that we give us our well-being and the things that we really want with very little energy use, okay? And that's the direction we have to head. Technology is going to be vitally important this century, but it's going to have to be appropriate technology, scalable technology, affordable technology that doesn't just give us dopamine and quick hits of unexpected reward, but that has meaning and is more sustainable. Okay, what to do as a community? Social capital is going to be key. All right? No matter what happens in the future, if you know your neighbors, even if they disagree with you politically, we're going to be better off. Imagine everyone in your city, including you, living on 30% less, because I think that day is coming. We need to plan for a great simplification, but we keep getting social signals that business as usual will continue. So our brains didn't evolve to handle the perfect storm nature of what we face. It's complex, it's threatening, it's abstract, it's in the future. No one of high profile in my world is telling me these things. But we need to anticipate what sort of investments in our community would be appropriate to the blue line instead of the red line. So there will be communities that when they hear this message, and this message will be known by everyone within a decade, except for the evolution part, probably not that. But some people are going to go to scarcity, guns, gold, Bitcoin, beans, bullets, all that stuff. But other communities are going to suppress that, and it's going to be a lot more about social capital and food and skills and learning and community, and that's up to us. We're going to have to localize and regionalize supply chains because the world is going to get be a larger place again. We're not going to be able to buy little tiny spark plug components from South Korea for the rest of the century. We're going to have to rebuild the most important aspects of our supply chains. I just put these concentric circles around Minnesota, but I don't know how that looks. Start a local makerspace. I know there are these in Minneapolis, where instead of 100 people having 10 pieces of equipment each, They bring one where 100 different pieces of equipment are there and you learn skills and can build stuff, meet other people. These are great ways to save money, build social capital, and get skills. Skills and knowledge. What about the older people in the room here? You have how many grandchildren that you can't even get their attention because they're doing this and they're not learning how to grow and process food and how to repair knitting or whatever. We've lost these basic skills. We can still teach this to the younger generation. As an individual, my class, Reality 101, we talk about human behavior, the brain, we talk about energy in the economy, and we talk about the environment. Together, that's understanding our situation, which is really important because you have to understand this before you can do something about it. But understanding is only one piece of it. There's also being, how to be alive during this time, how to train your brain to take this stuff in stride, to meditate, to be healthy. And then there's the doing. What do you do with all this stuff? It's a lot to take on board. So one thing is those who have a modicum of resources, psychological and physical health, I think we have to step up. We're not alive at normal times. We should make an outsized impact even though we're not getting the direct cues to do that. If this makes you sad, that's appropriate. You should grieve and reflect about the things that I've introduced to you, and I'm sure most of you are aware of a lot of this stuff. So laughter and bliss is not the appropriate response to hearing a presentation like this. Now, we still have to be funny and enjoy our lives, but this is a profound, solemn time on this planet, so a little bit of grief and reflection, I think, is appropriate. Think for yourself. Avoid the consensus trance. When we think about the agenda, the gene, and directing us towards comfort and novelty and social status and experiences, we have to also recognize the resource and unsustainability of that and use personal restraint, not to save the planet, but to make your own lives better and more resilient for the future. Be motivated by intrinsic goals as opposed to extrinsic. This is my little brother and I. We go on hiking trips every year. And I go through a couple days of withdrawal where we're in the great Appalachian Trail and my cell phone doesn't work and I'm checking it and there's no Wi-Fi. But after a week, I feel happier and healthier for having disconnected and slowed down my pace to a human scale. Shift perspective. We compare ourselves to others in a pecuniary society, but we really all live in a world of abundance. If we compare ourselves to our ancestors and our descendants, how rich is this society now? So shift your own perspective for, instead of comparing yourself to the neighbor who just got a new fishing boat and a better house, just say, I'm happy for you, Joe, but I'm happy for myself and these are the things I'm doing. Shift the perspective. It's very hard to do, but we compare ourselves to others constantly and try to train yourself to compare yourself to you and the things that are important. And living this time, we have to find a balance and be kind to yourselves because this is a lot. Simplify and beat the rush, okay? So if you can imagine some of the trajectories I've talked about, even if you think they're 10 or 15% possible, not like me thinks they're 95% possible, even if you think there's a small chance, you can make changes in your own life to reduce your reliance on a lot of outside energy or a lot of outside travel or a lot of outside expense. You can get ahead of the curve, and if you really understand the human brain, that we will not do anything as a culture ahead of a crisis. If you really understand that and you really think about it, you have to kind of create the crisis in your head first. Like, holy crap, this really is going to happen. That means I really need to make some changes, and it's tough. Make America good. Put kindness and empathy back into our daily lives. You know, being in Minneapolis, it's not totally left here. It still exists. But as a culture, I think we need to have pilots and examples of communities, people living differently. Learn skills that are going to be necessary. Appreciate that we use 100 times more energy than we need. And I took a car up here to speak to 50 strangers about these issues with a little bit of this is amazing. How many of our ancestors could do something like this? So appreciate the energy bounty that we have and make use of it. Observe and think about how you think, you as an individual. This is called metacognition. And share this journey with others who have your worldview, your ethic, and your humanity. And embrace uncertainty. It is more comfortable to believe in the red or blue circle. It is more meaningful and will help the future more if you can be in the middle and avoid those two poles. And we have to protect the species around us that don't have a say in what's going on in the human sphere. And rather than be vegetarian and don't drive a car and don't use straws and a whole long list of things, which are all good, I prefer to tell my students, don't try to minimize your impact, because if you do that, you're just minimizing your 1/8 billionth of human impact on the system. Try to maximize your impact. I used resources to come and pass the cultural baton to 50 humanists today. It would have been better for the planet had I stayed on my back 40 and harvested my potatoes, which I still have to do by tomorrow. But maximize your impact at larger scales and strategize. Who you are is primary, okay? So putting a few solar panels on your house or driving an electric car, those are downstream. Who you are is going to matter to the future, because future organizations, institutions, government is going to be comprised of individuals who know things and care about things. So as Minnesota humanists, thinking about this, we need coaches and leaders to increase the percentage of intrinsically motivated citizens in society using reason, community, and new stories. And I think this is a time to plant rocks in the river that are stable, and when the water starts rushing, those rocks stay. And the more rocks that we can put in the river, metaphorically, as individuals who are strong and understand these things and want to play a role, not only do we stabilize the system, but we might redirect the flow of the water. So this has been kind of a sledgehammer of a presentation. I'm all in on spending the rest of my life working on these issues. We are not alive at normal times. The world is tenuous and fluid, and there's a lot of scary stuff, but I prefer to look at my future and working on these things as an adventure. I've already grieved for these futures. Okay, so the future I expect, I'm fully immersed in it, and I want to play a role in it, and I invite you all to play a role in the future. Thank you.